Hello, my name's Narendran, the host of Master of Your Crafts podcast. Learning from leaders who are continuously inspired, passionate, and driven to align with their soul purpose, sharing their gifts to bring healing to others. The music is composed by Rebecca Everett. Today is episode number 72, and I'll be talking to Coach John, a weight loss coach and emotional eating expert who lost 100 pounds. From nanotechnology research to Navy Marine engineer to globetrotter nomad, Coach John spent most of his life running from his true calling until one question changed his life. Now he's on a mission to help others lose weight for good and leave the BS diets in the rearview mirror. With Freedom Nutrition Coaching, he marries the science of metabolism with psychology and behavior changes and the compassion of human connection to create long life changes and transformations with his clients. Hello and welcome to Jonathan. How are you, Jonathan?
I'm doing amazing. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm curious to learn more about all the skill sets and wisdom and brilliance that you bring to the table of how you live your life, not only from a nutritional standpoint, but also from a business perspective too.
Yeah.
What is it that encompasses all of those things that you now believe about who you are now?
Well, it probably took me almost my full 40 years to figure out what it was I feel like I'm born to do, which is to be a coach and a mentor and a guide for people. And I think I ran from that for a really, really long time. If you look at my sort of historical work resume, I've had a lot of different professions, from nanotech researcher to traveling English teacher to marine engineer to power line technician to, the list goes on. But I could never seem to I was never satisfied in those things. And I couldn't seem to stick with them for any great length of time before I just wanted to pull my hair out and run away. But when I found coaching, it just was a natural fit. And so I say that I've been blessed. I mean, I think we're all blessed with a great brain, and we all have different gifts. And the ones that I have, I say I have a high IQ and a high EQ. And so I have an engineering brain, which I'm really good at making systems and efficiencies. But I have a high level of emotional intelligence as well, and just the ability to connect with people on a deeper level. And you put those two things together, and it makes for a really good coach. And it probably took me almost to my 40 years to be comfortable saying that these are the gifts that I have, and it is what I'm born to do. But now I get to do it, and I love it.
And what a beautiful gift that is, even at 40 years, that you can now say it proudly and with some muscle in the game, if you will, because you've exercised that practice throughout the previous careers, right?
Yeah, it took some time to, I think we very much misunderstand humility in a lot of ways. I like the thought that humility is not thinking less of yourself, but just thinking of yourself less. In other words, recognizing that it's not really all about me. The work that I do is really, really amazing and very, very fulfilling for me. But it's if I only did it to sort of gratify my own ego, I don't think I would be nearly as effective as I am at what I do. But instead, I recognize that it's about having the privilege of kind of being a witness and a guide to people as they go through this kind of journey of life. And I like metaphors and analogies. So I think about it like I'm going to help somebody co-write a couple of chapters in their story. So I'm going to be a part of their life for a couple of chapters and help them co-write those. And that changes the ending of their story. And it's really, really cool.
How powerful is that? Dropping in a chapter and being a character and playing a couple of roles here and there. That's pretty interesting analogy and concept, because that's what happens in life, right? We have
Mhm.
experiences with different people.
Well, I believe that human beings, we're really wired to learn from other human beings. So we learn through stories, we learn through life experience. If Google's fantastic, but if information was really the problem, it would have solved all our problems, and it hasn't, because we're human beings and we need connection to other human beings to, I think, really achieve our highest potential. And so
Right.
because of this, I always make sure that I have at least one coach and mentor in my life as well.
Yes. It's so crucial that there is that comfortable but uncomfortable zone for each of us to be in, be it a coach or a coachee. Both of
Mm.
us need to be that stretch and watch that elastic or that muscle expand and contract.
Yeah. Well, one of the projects I'm working on now is writing a book. I've
Mm.
written two before this, but they're fairly short, small books that are just in digital format. But this is a longer book that I'm writing in more detail, but kind of about my story and how that is translated into the work that I do. And so I decided that I would hire a coach to help me through this process. Um,
Yes.
I think all of us, in one sense, have a story, and that's part of what my podcast is about too. It's called Between the Before and After, but and it's about sharing people's stories in life of overcoming obstacles. So each one of
Mm-hmm.
us has a story, and so I wanted to kind of capture that. But having somebody ask pertinent and thoughtful questions, because we take a lot of elements of our own stories for granted, because it's kind of our lived experience and it's normal to us, and it's just how we know life to be. But somebody on the outside, an observer, can go, have you ever thought about this or this or this, and really draw out elements that maybe I would otherwise miss.
That's right. And it's so key to have that other person's perspective or vantage
Mm.
point, because when we're in it, we just don't see it. We're
Well,
too ingrained in it and consumed from it
well,
as
I
well.
like the analogy that you can't read the label when you live inside the bottle.
That's very true. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And especially if the cap's already on it, then there's a whole different story.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've heard it said, I guess you can't see the painting when you live inside the frame. Same sort of idea. It takes
Mhm.
somebody else to um, who doesn't necessarily have the same level of depth of emotional investment in you and your life to be able to spot things that we might otherwise be blind to, just because of our emotional investment in our life experience.
Mhm. Which ultimately is a gift in itself, because if we weren't drenched in the emotional aspects of relationships and experiences, it'd make life pretty boring.
Yeah, emotion is what gives life color, and I, I consider that a lot of our modern life seems to be geared towards giving us emotional anesthetics, I call them. So
Nice.
things that take us away from our emotions, so whether it's maybe binge watching things on Netflix, or eating junk food, or drinking alcohol, or consuming
Right.
drugs, all of these things, in one sense, can act as an emotional anesthetic. So I feel an uncomfortable emotion. Okay, well, let's just cover it up. Let's drown
Mm.
it. Let's wash it away. Let's numb it. Let's distract it. And I think that's a real shame, because emotions are a bit like a check engine light. You'll see that I like analogies.
Mhm.
A check engine light doesn't tell us what's wrong with the engine, but it tells us that something needs our attention.
Right.
And most people turn to the equivalent of putting a piece of black electrical tape over that check engine light.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's very true.
So we want to cultivate the skill of being able to be present with difficult emotions.
Mhm. Mhm. It's so crucial to be able to identify them, but also recognize what to do with them. So,
Mm.
as you share this and your own analogies of what life has presented you and how you've, I want to say, muddled through them, but I don't know if that's really the case, but
Oh,
you've
totally.
worked through them.
Life's a lot of muddling.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What do you believe is your calling now, here, at this moment of time?
Really to be that guide for other people. And I go back to how I struggle with the idea of humility and being able to accept that this is what I'm good at. In fact, it's what I'm born to do. For a long time, I was uncomfortable with that idea, and yet it's the thing that kept pulling me and drawing me, and it's something that I do very, very well. And so, here's the thing: a calling, it's beautiful when it's for other people, but I get so much from it as well. I learn so much from the people that I work with. Uh, the students become the teachers time and time again, and so it's really, really fulfilling and powerful in both directions.
Absolutely. And that's the gift, right? That's the gift that we don't often recognize and see. When we give to others, we actually receive twofold.
Mm,
So,
mm. Well, I
yeah.
often say to people, just a simple act, we might feel a sense of despair at the troubles that the world is experiencing. And maybe the world has always experienced it, but we're just more aware of it because we can be informed 24 hours a day of it.
Mhm.
But it's too big for any one person to solve all of the problems, but we can create a ripple just by doing something kind for another person. And that
Absolutely.
already touches two hearts. And then they might go and touch, and do the same thing. And we can create a ripple effect in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. The power of intention and the power of just a general act of kindness. And it doesn't mean buying anything or doing anything
Yeah.
that's going to be, very taxing on your time and energy. But I want to even say, even walking down the street and smiling at somebody
Yeah.
can be an act of kindness, and not recognizing how that generosity of kindness and love and acceptance can be emanated just from a smile.
What's really interesting, because you mentioned maybe the thought that people might feel like I have to buy something. And I think what's really the value behind a gift is not maybe what the gift itself is, but the intention behind the gift, the thought that goes into it. So you thought about me, and you thought enough about me that you wanted to add this to my life. And the human connection is far more important than the physical token.
Yeah, absolutely. But we live in a world of consumerism,
Unfortunately, we do.
and that plays a big role on how we move through the world and how we show acts of kindness and how we show love to loved ones, families, friends, or an element of appreciation. It comes through often monetarily.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, well, and maybe it comes from, because throughout most of human history, most people had a scarce quantity of resources available to them, and so you think about food. Sharing food is an act of sharing resources with other people, and our survival is one of the most powerful instincts that we possess, and so to share food with others is really quite remarkable. We're sort of transcending our more primal biology when we do that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. What are your intentions with your craft of not only giving to others and supporting and guiding them through their journey, but what are some of the other intentions that you would like to embed further and have that ripple out?
Well, I also have started mentoring other coaches, and teaching them just from my experience. Part of that is because I recognize there's just certain limitations physically to how many people I can work with in my lifetime in an impactful capacity. And so if I can mentor another and give them some tools, and it's not to make carbon copies of me, but
Right.
to guide them and to help them see what their greatest gifts are as well. um, that's maybe a way of creating a ripple effect. And then I think about, so I'm a fairly prolific content creator. I am writing a book, but I've had up to 4 podcasts, so the 2 are on hiatus. And it's about, again, sort of sharing and creating, um, because I've had the privilege of traveling around the world. I've been in a number of
Mm.
different countries, been 45 countries on 5 continents, and
Wow.
lived in about 7 countries. And so I've seen life from a number of different perspectives. And I think that's really impacted me in a way that maybe I wouldn't have realized if I just sort of stayed living in Canada, where I'm from, and lived in a first world country. And so I think, well, a lot of the struggles that we face are really quite universal.
Mm.
And, it goes back to the small act of kindness. It's like, if I would like to see the world be a better place, I have to believe enough in what I'm doing to um, move forward and create a positive impact, without trying to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders, but know that it is enough, that the work that I do is enough to create more positivity than before I was in this world. And I think if I don't suppose this would ever really truly happen, but I imagined if every person on the planet said, it's my intention to help one person live a better life, the transformation would be infinite. It would just be infinitely remarkable. And so, but because I recognize that not everybody's in a position to, because I guess it maybe speaks a little bit to the privilege that I have as well. The fact that I have sufficient resources myself. That is not to say that my life has been easy. It's been difficult. I've had plenty of challenging experiences, but I am in a place where I have sufficient resources that I can think of others and give to others. And I can do the work that I do. And not everybody's in a place where they can do that. There are still people all around the world who are just struggling to find food to eat. And so then I recognize, well, if I'm in this place of privilege, because privilege is sometimes a bit of a loaded word, I think. And sometimes it gets weaponized and used in a negative way. And I say, I don't feel any guilt for the privilege that I have, but I do feel some responsibility. And there's a big difference there. I'm not, that I have a certain amount of privilege with, the country I was born into and whatnot, the gifts that I do have, that it would be good if I was to use that to give back. And yes, obviously I do this to make a living as well. As wonderful as it would be to do it entirely free of charge, or to have that, sufficient resources, it is necessary to also earn a living from this. But I get to earn a living doing something that is really meaningful and creates a positive impact in people's lives. And so I love that.
But it's also important to recognize, in the face of giving, there needs to be an exchange that happens. So be it a monetary exchange, which is the currency that most people really understand and equate more value to than time and energy.
The thought of, let's say, giving our gifts away for free has a degree of appeal to it, or a degree of attraction. I can see that in a sense. But there's an element of, if we don't recognize the value in the gifts that we have, maybe we are tempted to, or the inherent value that we possess, we aren't tempted to give it away. But money is kind of a medium, right? It's just a placeholder of value. So let's say I've exchanged my skills and my time and my resources to acquire this medium called money. And then in turn, I use that money in exchange for something that somebody else has to offer. And the amount of, obviously there's some boundaries around this, but let's say the amount of money that I'm willing to invest is kind of a reflection of the value that I expect to receive.
Right.
And so to do what we do and to charge for what we do is because if I've uncovered another thing in terms of human psychology, it's the struggle for humans to see value in something that they haven't invested in. So when it's free of charge, it doesn't cost us anything to do nothing.
That's right.
So
that's right. The value that's positioned on it is minimal to none. And that's where I guess I'm a firm believer in that transitional space of having energy being your currency and time being your currency, rather than an actual product or a thing or a tangible piece.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it. And I think time is our most valuable currency because it's the one that we don't get back. So, pardon me, we're left with kind of two options here. We can invest it, or we can, well, maybe three. We can waste it, we can spend it, or we can invest it. And it's not to say that any one of those is a better option, but it's if things get a little bit out of balance, we can't necessarily always be investing our time into growth. We would lose out on some of the, sometimes I'm spending time being present with my son, for example, where we're not having any deep life lessons. I'm just, blowing raspberries on his tummy because his giggle is amazing,
Nice. And it's important because ultimately, at the end of the day, life is to be lived. Right? And while there is a goal and there's an aspiration or something that we want to attain, it's being present in this moment and living in it, which I think is often left by the wayside.
It is for forgetting to live life. It's life is life is always going to present us with challenges. I was going to say struggles, but I think I prefer to frame it as challenges.
Hmm.
And some of the challenges are really, really, really hard.
Yeah,
Um, but it's actually, I would say, in those challenges is where I've discovered, and I think most people would find this, that it's when we are challenged and we're kind of forced to dig in and use the strengths that we have, that we really discover what we're capable of.
yeah,
And so the course of life is that it is, you know, that life is going to present enough challenging and suffering without us trying to make it more difficult. Um,
absolutely.
so when we're given an opportunity to just enjoy and be present and live life in the moment, um, it's something special that should be cherished. But I have this thought that if something isn't special, if we have it all the time,
That's right.
it's hard to appreciate if it's always there. We kind of
Yes,
take it for granted. But when it's not always there, then it becomes something special that we can cherish and appreciate.
absolutely. And that's the curves and the nature of life, is it not? Even through the emotional space, to be in a place of joy and bliss every single moment wouldn't have the lust and the lure behind it if we were there all the time.
Yeah. Well, there is no true happiness without knowing sadness.
That's right.
There's no peace without knowing some turmoil.
Yes.
Um, and so it almost goes back to this. Maybe we've been hoodwinked by modern life
Mm.
that somehow,
Hmm.
if things aren't always blissful or perfect or peaceful or wonderful, that somehow something is wrong or something is missing. And it's like, well, no, actually, life would be incomplete without the difficult parts as well.
That's right.
So then we look at maybe perspective and go, there's something that could be said for just the ability to reframe difficult experiences and say, not to, for lack of a better analogy, say put a rainbow in a turd. Um,
Mm.
that's kind of I guess the false positivity, right?
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
ability to reframe it as, in these difficult experiences, I will gain something from it.
Mm.
So I think I went through trauma and PTSD about 11 years ago, and
Mm.
I wouldn't put up my hand to go through that experience again.
Right.
But going through that experience, and I'm very grateful to have survived it, but going through that experience put me through some of the hardest years of my life. As a, anyone who's grappled and wrestled with mental health struggles will understand
Sure.
that the biggest challenge with mental health is it feels like we can't really escape from inside our head.
Hmm.
It's a real challenge. And so,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't be where I am today doing what I'm doing if I hadn't gone through those struggles. So I could look back
Mm.
and think, well, I don't think this, but if I had the thought, well, I wish this had never happened to me. Well, I wouldn't be where I am doing what I do, except that that happened to me.
Absolutely.
And so it's hard sometimes in the moment to see that, but I'm
Yeah.
able to do what I do because of what I've been through.
Absolutely. So, from that, what do you feel are some of the attributes that connect you to do what you do now so easily and so fluidly and lovingly? I want to say.
Well, I would say curiosity is a really, really important one. Curiosity, I just, I want to engage and understand and know and learn about people's stories, what makes people tick.
Mm.
So uh, there's, if we want to find more joy in life, it's like, I would encourage people to tap into the innate curiosity of the human spirit.
Right.
I think that's probably the first part of it. Um, then there's the compassion piece, and
Mm.
that's something that took me quite a long time to learn. Um, and really, compassion is difficult to show to others until we learn to show it to ourselves.
Yes.
And so it took until I was about 36 and was working with a mentor who actually modeled for me what compassion looks like,
Mm.
that I was able to start showing it to myself. And as I became able to see myself through this lens of compassion, I then became able to extend it to others. And so, really, it's, I would almost call it like what I do, compassionate lifestyle engineering is probably
Nice.
what I would call it. It's not actually what I call my business, but I think about that. That's kind of what we're doing here is,
Hmm.
and then I have kind of this gift for, like I said, for engineering kind of processes and systems and efficiencies. And so
Yes.
I use that. So somebody comes to me and says, hey, I'm struggling with this thing. And I didn't realize that this wasn't normal, but my brain calculates things at a really fast rate. And I can really map out a path for somebody after the first conversation.
Nice.
And it's that thing that we have these innate abilities that we don't think anything of, because it's just like, it's how my brain works. But I go back to, most of my family used to get so frustrated playing board games with me. Like, it's like you have this unfair advantage because you're like 6 steps ahead of everybody and your brain works so quickly. But I didn't know anything different. It was like, that's just what my brain does.
Funny.
But it's what got me so frustrated working in so many jobs. Really, is I'd be doing this job and I'd figure out a more efficient way to do it, and I'd finish my work in a fraction of the time, and then I'd have to sort of figure out, okay, now what do I do with my time?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So
that's quite a gift. That's quite a gift.
yeah. And I think each one of us has gifts. And so when I work with somebody, that's another thing that I try to uncover for them, is like, what are the gifts that they have? And maybe they can't necessarily turn their gifts into their profession, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't use the gifts that you have to better your life and the lives of others around you.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It is important to not only be able to identify your own, but have a different person's perspective, because, like, how many analogies have you used? We don't see our own selves in the same light because we're just it.
Yeah.
Where are you going from here? What's next for Jonathan?
That's always an interesting question, because I used to think, I got to have the 5-year plan or 10-year plan or and so on. And it's not to say that I don't plan ahead. I kind of know what I want to do, which is have a podcast, like take my podcast kind of around the world. What I mean by that is, first of all, I mean, I love interviewing people, but what would be really, really neat is to have a show where I interview people in fascinating destinations. So there's a really, really cool setting for it.
Yes.
So that's one of the things that I want to do, is continue to share people's stories, but share them from really interesting locations. So that's, if you were to say, if I could just do like one thing, that's what I would do. Is I would travel with my wife and my son, and I would interview people in fascinating destinations and really uncover their life story and share their life story with the world. That's what I love to do.
That is quite an adventure.
Yeah. My wife and I had a phrase, because we have traveled quite a bit, and we've got ourselves into a number of different pickles while traveling. But we had a phrase, John and Michelle, my wife's name is Michelle. So John and Michelle, always an adventure. And that's what we would remind ourselves when we were stuck in some ridiculous or absurd or really difficult or frustrating situation, that this is an adventure. It's an adventure. And one day we're going to tell the story. And when you get past people seeing us as like a sign of tourist dollars, and then you can sort of get to the next layer of a culture, there's so many really hospitable cultures around the world where they want to share. And I remember being in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia one time, and I was in a room, and we had some Chinese, some Malays, an Australian, a Brit, Canadian, American, Indian. And so we had, like, I don't know, maybe 8 different sort of nationalities represented, and we're all speaking English, and every one of us had a different accent.
Beautiful.
And it was so interesting to think about us, like trying to communicate. And I'm really grateful for the English language too. Just the fact that all of us in this, because Malaysia is a fairly ethnically diverse country as well.
Yes.
So to get into this room with all these different people, and we could all communicate. And I remember we went to like just kind of a local restaurant, so kind of open air restaurant, and they they serve food on banana leaves, which was pretty novel for me in a sense. And then it's just like, and we just sit on the ground, and you get these food on these banana leaves kind of in front of you, which is great because they're biodegradable plates. But people just like reach in and they grab with their hands. They just and for us, we were totally unaccustomed to eating that way, so we were kind of like, what? This is what people do, like, because it was probably one of my earlier exposures to like being in another country where they eat in a dramatically different way than we do.
Yes.
And so that was like kind of an interesting one. And actually, now I remember that day, Kuala Lumpur got hit with this like massive rainstorm where the rain, there was probably 4 inches of water like running down the streets, like more than ankle deep.
Wow.
And we're like we're under an umbrella, like trying to hug our suitcases, like trying to hold an umbrella. You can't see me if you're listening, but we're like trying to hug our suitcases while holding an umbrella to try and keep them from getting totally soaked, as it's just like bucketing down rain as we're trying to walk from this restaurant back to the hostel that we were staying in.
That's funny.
But this is, and people would think, oh, you guys are traveling the world, you're living the life, you're living the dream, there's the adventure and all of this. And it's like, it was, but sometimes adventure looks like hugging your suitcase, trying to hold your poor little umbrella together, not getting drenched in like a torrential downpour, sort of hoping that you didn't pick up a bug from like eating off of like shared food served on banana plates, or banana leaves as plates. Like it's stuff like that it just, and we look back with fondness about all of these times. Like that was a really mind expanding experience when we think about it. Like, wow, learning that, other people do things in a different way, and but sharing the hospitality as well.
Absolutely. And what a beautiful gift that is to witness that and experience it, and build those memories of time that we talked about earlier. And having them encapsulated in laughter, even today, as you share that story.
There's so many great memories. And so, I mean, I'm grateful that the world is kind of opening up to travel again, which is really, really fantastic. I think we're at a place where we realize, hey, we got to learn to live with this, and we can't just be sort of shut down for the rest of our lives. We have to, navigate sensibly, but try and function again as human beings and interconnected human beings.
That's right. That's what we were wired for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I love these stories, Jonathan. These are quite interesting stories, but nevertheless enriching for you as a coach. And to be able to recognize and support individuals on their journey, to give them different perspectives, to live life in a more enriched experience, right?
Well, I was thinking about the phrase "misery loves company." And I think maybe the original way that it was being used is like, so people who are speaking negatively about their experience want to sort of drag others down and make them feel miserable, join them in their misery. But I was like, maybe there's another perspective on that one. And that's like, when you're in a hard experience, it's a little easier when you're not alone in that experience. And that's when you can kind of end up kind of laughing about it, maybe laughing about the ridiculousness of it. I'll just share one more quick story. So I used to be in the Navy, and I was a marine engineer, meaning that we worked on systems that have like pipes and pumps and electrical and anything with moving parts, engines, motors, that kind of stuff. And we were out on the Pacific, and we came into a storm, and it was like a big one, with swells that were, 6-7 meters or 20-25 feet, like these big swells. And you look at a ship and it looks like so big when you see it tied up on the dock. Then you get on the ocean under one of these storms and it just gets chucked around like this little piece of cork. Oh, and you see the power of the ocean. And and in this storm, our sewage treatment plant went down.
Oh my goodness.
And guess who works in the sewage treatment plant? It's the engineers.
Oh my goodness.
And so I happen to be off watch. So if you're on watch, you have to be monitoring equipment and stuff. So you can't be like going and fixing something, because you actually have to be available if you're, so I was supposed to be sleeping. But I get woken up. Hey, the sewage treatment plant is down. You got to go fix this, And so me and 2 other engineers get woken up, and we're grumpy as all get out because, we've been dragged out of bed in the middle of a storm where you already feel miserable. Because the thing with when you're on a storm, like in a storm on the ocean, like there's no reprieve. There's nowhere you can go to lay down and things are still. You just get chucked around. Your whole world is being chucked around, and it's quite an experience too. So now we got to climb into like the bottom of this ship and climb into this space. And whoever engineered like the sewage treatment space, they weren't thinking about comfort. They just jammed a bunch of pipes and tanks and stuff in there. So now we got to try and monkey our way into this stupid space at like 3:00 in the morning while we're getting chucked around on the ocean. and one of the guys, he was the smallest one. So we're like, because I'm 6'1", 240. Like I'm a big guy.
Wow.
I have long arms, which is helpful, but like I'm a big guy. So his name was Jake. And so he was the one that could fit in behind this one tank where a pump was that we had to get access to get it unplugged. And people didn't have to go back there like very often. So strangely enough, like it was dusty in that space. You think, how on earth does dust get into this space? But anyways, dust can get anywhere, I guess.
Mhm.
And I remember him, he had to like lean down to pick up something, to get something. He dropped a wrench or something, and he brought his head back up. It brushed up against a pipe, and half of his face got covered in this gray dust. And it was just,
Oh,
and he just gave us like this stupid grin, like, I don't think this night can get any worse, because who knows what was in that dust,
that's true.
So,
That's
and
true.
it was just the ridiculousness of the situation, because we were all cranky and frustrated that we weren't sleeping and we were getting chucked around in the ocean and all this kind of stuff. And then he just looks up and he's got half his face covered in this thick layer of gray dust, and
Mm,
he's spitting it out. We all just started laughing, because
mm,
we're like, this is like the stupidest situation. Like, we could be at home, like, snuggle up to our wives or something like that.
sure.
Like, why did we sign up for this stupid thing where
Yeah.
we end up in the middle of the ocean doing this? But we just ended up kind of laughing about it. In fact, we kind of probably laughed for like 10 minutes straight, just at this,
Wow.
the ridiculousness of the situation. And so I just share the story to say, like, sometimes we find ourselves in just the most like awkward and awful and uncomfortable situations. But if we can find like human connection in that, and find a reason to maybe just laugh at the ridiculousness of it, it gives
Mhm.
us the strength to kind of keep going forward.
It does. And you know what? We shouldn't be taking life too seriously anyways,
I think about the phrase like, yeah, don't take life too seriously. You never get out alive.
right?
Yeah, we get one kick at this, right? So
That's right.
yeah,
That's right.
we can't always choose our circumstances, but we can choose how we respond in those circumstances.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we can get caught in that not living component that we talked about earlier, when it's so driven and goal and task and checklist and all that kind of stuff. We get lost in all of that. So
Yeah.
when we can kick back and laugh at ourselves and laugh at others,
Yeah.
it's a gift to be able to do that, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it takes some practice as well.
Mm.
So what we're kind of doing is we're teaching our brain to. So let's look at, you think about a practice like gratitude, and
Mhm.
which I think is an amazing practice. But I also look at it from a really like a practical and a brain health standpoint, which makes it really interesting to me. And that is
Mhm.
that, so if you look at our sort of our primal brain, and it's wired a certain way for a reason, to help us survive,
Mhm.
in a hostile world. But what it means is our brain is always scanning for negativity. Really, it's
Mhm.
scanning for threats. So anything that makes us feel a negative emotion is perceived to be a threat.
Right.
So if we allow our brain to kind of operate in its default kind of primal state, the lower levels of our brain function, we are always looking at negativity. And then you think about, news media and social media, digital media, print media,
Yes.
they predominantly share negative things with us because it draws our attention. So we live in the
That's
attention
right.
economy, right?
Yeah.
So we're wired already to look for negativity. And now we're fed a constant stream of negativity
Mhm.
if we allow that to be the case. And so it maybe it comes as no surprise that we have such a like a mental health crisis, for
That's
example,
right.
and so many prescription drugs and so on. It's like, what are we feeding our brain?
Mhm.
But and I'm not trying to suggest that there isn't sometimes a medical necessity for these things. Like, we live in an age where we are
Sure.
privileged to have access to some of these as well. But I do believe that there it's an epidemic here when we have to prescribe millions and millions and millions of people mood altering drugs because they can't cope with sort of the rigors of day-to-day life.
Right.
And so it's not how I kind of imagined life being lived. But to bring it back to gratitude, with gratitude, what we're doing is we're teaching our brain to look for positive things.
Mhm.
So, and the more we practice this, the happier we become.
Mhm.
And it's not always about finding, some sort of big grand thing. In fact, it's even better when we start looking for little things to be grateful for,
Mhm. Mhm.
because then we start to see like, wow, there's a lot of things around me that I can be grateful for. And it takes a little bit of effort to do this. But then through the process of neuroplasticity, which is this
That's right.
amazing property of our brain,
Mhm.
we start to rewire our brain to be happier because we've taught it to look around all these things to appreciate in our lives. And so gratitude has the power to dramatically shift our life experience.
Mhm. It is a powerful process, but it takes time and commitment,
Mhm,
and
mhm,
perhaps a little bit of courage to go to that place and
mhm.
recognize I don't want to follow that path, even though it's been ingrained and even though other people are doing it and
Yeah.
even though it's comfortable. And I choose to make a different path. I choose to take a different road for myself, for my own intentions and for my own purpose, if you will.
Yeah.
It's important. It's important. Jonathan, I could go on and have so many more deep conversations and listen to these stories that you shared. I think they're all very enriching. So thank you so much for your shares and your stories and the wisdom that you share.
Well, it's been a real pleasure. I appreciate you hosting this space. There's something about being heard and validated. I think this is really, really important as well. And so for those listening, I would say, share your stories. There's something about other people listening and hearing and being a part of your stories that really has a powerful, positive effect on your life as well. So I appreciate you for hosting this space.
You're very welcome. I'm Naranjan, and you've been listening to Master of Your Crafts podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review, and join me next week for another episode. Thank you for listening.